Suicide, then forgiveness. Shattering stigma, igniting hope. I'm Elaine Lindsay, and my mission is to end the silence, the stigma, the shame surrounding suicide and mental health. We talk about the hard stuff because asking for help should be as easy as ordering a coffee. Here, we share real stories from those who've lost someone, survived an attempt, live with ideation, or battle mental health challenges. Why? Because sharing your burden can lighten the load. Please note, Suicide Then Forgiveness, the podcast, is for education only. Some of the subject matter could be triggering for those who are either grieving or having mental health problems. If you're in North America, you can text 988 for immediate support. And if you're elsewhere, please reach out to your local suicide hotline or mental health service. You matter. My aim is to normalize the conversation so you feel safe enough to speak up and ask for help. So now, let's start the show. Hello there. It's good to be back. I'm Elaine Lindsay, and my guest today is Edy Nathan. Thank you so much for joining us, Edy.
Elaine, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have this conversation. I had looked at, I think I saw you on a different podcast at one point, which is why I reached out, because I thought this is the type of guest I definitely would like our audience to be able to interact with. Without further ado, why don't you give us a little something about you and what you do?
What I'd love for you all to know is I'm a storyteller, and grief has many stories. And so this is how I love to present around a topic that is so hard and yet such an incredible teacher. So I've written something, and this is for you. The cave awaits. It's dark. It hurts. It's a place no one chooses. I have a love-hate relationship with that cave of grief. Being in it means I'm facing a loss. Being in it means daring to live with it, evoking the depths of my soul's, your soul's work. This dark place offers you and me a chance to meet the shadows of grief and mourning. Given the chance, it can transform you and me from a stuck state of being into and going into metamorphosis. Knowing the pain is one thing, believing it will change, that is hard to imagine. This is what the work of grief for me and loss and trauma is all about. I want to believe that I offer a new way to think about tangling with this potent adversary, but really it's based on each individual, and no one experiences it in exactly the same way. It's like our fingerprint. It's tangling with this potent adversary. And yeah, do I have a little bit of schooling? I went to NYU and Fordham, and I'm a sex therapist from the University of Michigan. But what I like to do is talk about the things that we don't want to talk about, but do so in a way that's not scary, and yet it's grounded. And I'm in the process of writing another book. The first book was on grief, and it's called It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. And I'll talk about the dance. And I believe that we have the power all along to be the change agents we need to be as we meet grief head on. Thank you, Elaine.
That was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow. It's turning turning things on its head a little for me. I never quite thought of it that way. You are right. Grief is absolutely different for all of us. And time frames and all of that are so different. We'll start. I like to have people always start with how they got where they are now. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can give us a look into your first walk into that cave.
Mm. So I think the cave has many different chances to invite us in, even though we really don't want to be invited in. And it really does start probably with birth when that umbilical cord gets cut and what happens soon after that, and how somehow grief is about cutting that umbilical cord over and over again and trying to find life beyond the cutting of it. And so I would say that I came into this world seeing and knowing things that I don't know how I knew them or why I even experienced them, but the family that I was born into didn't know what to do with this young kid who wanted to save the animals and take the homeless folks home. And it was like, no, Edie, you can't do that. You just can't do that. And I see you're laughing, but truly, like I had to unlearn what seemed to come so naturally to me. And truly, that was my first experience with grief because I think grief is about the loss of something that you can't imagine being able to get back. And that loss started then because I had to reframe at that tender age of 2, 3. I had to reframe how I was in the world, and I learned that early on. And our losses can occur certainly because we've lost a loved one. And at that tender age, I had not lost a loved one, but somehow I had lost myself. And what I've learned is that it is the losing of the self that makes it so much harder to cope with the loss of a loved one when we're faced with that. So when I was 27, the love of my life, the one who taught me about love, Paul, sadly died and transitioned. And he was much older than myself, but he taught me about love. And as a result of losing him at 27, everything that I hadn't dealt with, that I swallowed from dealing with mistreatment and abuses of different kinds, what I call now predatory events that happen to many folks. That grief actually summoned up all the things I had not yet dealt with at that young and ripe age of 27, and hence changed the entire trajectory of my life. Paul and we acted, and I was going to go into the world, the cosmos of as a trainer and teach in like environments where they needed trainers, whether it was executives or the likes. And I just said, no, this calling right now is stronger than me. And there was no one to talk to at 27, because at 27, Elaine, what was going on was that the people I was meeting kept saying, but you're young and you'll meet someone. And that just frankly made me want to fall apart even more.
That I can feel your grief as you talk, and that he really was the love of your life.
Yeah.
It's hard when you witness someone's grief at the same time that you witness their joy. So,
Well said. Thank you for that. Yeah.
oh, you're so welcome. Very obvious to me. You just lit up. Yeah. Wow. Wow. I am so sorry that you lost him. It must have completely shifted you off your axis.
That's exactly what it did. I've never thought of it in terms of that, but whatever access I did have and access to the access felt completely lost. And yeah, and it was having to, I could say rebuild, but truly building something and trying to find the right the right equipment to help me, internal equipment, emotional equipment, spiritual equipment, emotional equipment to help me build something that was going to look brand new and take grow it and nurture it, as also growing and developing myself. I had to face where was I stuck, and who were my allies, who were going to be my allies, who were my superheroes, and then certainly what kind of metamorphosis was I looking for. And I actually have a journal, and those are the 3 prompts in that journal, and it goes with the book, It's Grief. And I learned that it was a dance, that the more I tried to push it away, the feelings of the grief, the excruciating pain, the sadness, I was not finding solace in pushing it away. I was just going deeper and deeper into the depths of despair. And this cave, the innermost cave, is actually, it's Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, but I call it Hero Shiro. And it's what that journey is about, and we are forever in the journey, is that something happens that forever changes your life and you can't go back. And as much as you want to go back, you can't go back. And it feels like an injustice. It truly feels like a social injustice. But the reality is that there are times when you can't go back. You can't go back into the womb. They can't stuff you back in, and you can't rekindle the umbilical cord, and nor could I bring back Paul. And I then realized that the work was about learning how to kindle the love. And that was where the cave comes in, because you go through this kind of journey in the cave. This innermost cave is a place where you meet your obstacles, you meet the challenges, and it's cyclical. You go in, you come out, you're forever changed. You decide who are your allies, who is not your ally, but who might be your best teachers. And sometimes it might be your enemies. So grief was certainly nothing that I welcomed. On the other hand, it was something that slowly but surely, if I partnered with it, it could be a teacher, and it could push me beyond realms I could never have imagined.
You've blown me away, because it's such a different take on grief.
Yeah.
In the way you say grief as a teacher, you're actually looking for, I want to say, the bright lights, the good inside all of that. Very often when people say grief is a teacher, they're talking about loss and hurt and lack, rather than anything with a positive spin. So that's a really important piece there.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
time frame from 27, how long did it take you to get far enough along this new road that, I don't want to say felt in charge, but that you felt you were owning the road?
I pause because I want to answer you as precisely as I can. And in some ways, that 27-year-old was very old. And in some ways, that 27-year-old was very young. And the young part of me, I talk about this in hindsight, some of it, because there were paths that I chose that were the right paths for the young 27-year-old, not for the wise 27-year-old. And I married about 2 years after he died, and married a man who was raising his 2 almost teenage girls on his own. And I fell in love with the family, and with his humor, and with the girls who were smart and fun and funny, and who just took my heart and again continued to show me love, or what love was. And they were into theater, and so I could enjoy being an advocate and a cheerleader and watching them blossom and bloom. And their father was also a writer and very talented and a creative. And I I probably got married way too soon. I didn't do the necessary work I needed to do, but I also needed another kind of love that would save me selfishly. And I think that we worked as a family for as long as we could. It is now many years later, and those girls are women and they are married and they have families, and they are both writers and creatives and amazing women. And I was closer in age to them pretty much than I was to their father, and remained friends with their father as well, and participated in weddings. And but what I would say though is that the part of me that had the traumatic awareness that arose when I was 27, though I was awakened to it, I didn't really start to grapple with its power and its potency until much later. And I think that's where I went back to school. I got a couple of master's degrees and then became a sex therapist and a sex educator. Because what I started to realize is that the grief that is sometimes the most difficult to deal with, the loss of a loved one, for sure, but it is often further complicated if there are unresolved, it doesn't get resolved. There are events or experiences that have happened that have not yet been honored or dealt with and looked at. And so I became a therapist. As my work as a clinician, my thesis was on grief, and what started out to be 7 phases of grief have now turned into 11 phases, and that's what I write about in my book. And realize that, oh, this is a dance. It's not something you get through or get over. I I don't have a lot of things that I kept from Paul, but I did keep his Timex watch that I keep in a little pouch, a little gray pouch. And every time I just need a little bit of Paul energy, I wind it up. And we don't know from winding necessarily, but it goes tick, tick, tick. And I feel his presence, and I remember the watch on his wrist. And it is very much part of knowing that this is definitely a dance and it doesn't end, it just changes over time. And so all of this information was a partnership, so that instead of wanting to just push it away, which just made all of the pain and the anxiety and the crumbling in the middle of a floor in tears, made it much more doable and livable. When I said, okay, you know what, I can't fight you anymore. I'm going to need to learn about you and be curious.
I've always considered grief to be like a train we get on. And like you said, sometimes we get off, but we get back on.
That's right.
And others join us.
That's
But
right.
it's once you're on that train, you don't ever like leave it permanently. It is now how you move through the world is on the train. So I really like the concept of the cave and the revisiting, because I believe you have to get to a place in your grief journey where you internally understand that this is for life.
That's right. That's right. And sadly, the people who want to help or make it better will say some of the most helpless statements they can make. And the helplessness is, when are you going to get over it?
Yeah.
But it's for them. It's not about you. Or you're young. You're going to get married again. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You have your whole life ahead of you. And that's not how it feels to me when I'm in a puddle in the middle of the floor, crying, not able to put on a pair of pants because I've eaten so much that nothing fits because I was stuffing my grief down.
And it's odd how people don't realize you don't want to replace people.
No.
If your grandparents die, you don't go out and get new ones. I'm sorry, I can be very
No, it's
literal at times.
yeah.
But yeah, I always found it odd the way people were like, okay, let's move on now. No, there is no moving on without your people. And you'll find in many cultures, they laud the stories and taking our people that we've lost with us. I have grandchildren. The youngest are 11 and 8. And my grandmother died in 1985. So they have no concept of her, or they should have no concept of her. She is part of family dinners, as is everyone else we've lost, because they're part of our family. And as a Brit, that's how I was brought up.
Sure.
Because someone's passed doesn't mean we dispose of them.
Right. That's right. And we don't forget, but it may be that people around us might want us to forget. But this is not ever about forgetting.
No.
It's about learning how to remember peacefully.
That's so well put. And there are a lot of people too. It's not that they want us to forget, it's they're afraid if they remind us, they're somehow putting us back in a place of pain.
So that's an interesting statement of they're putting us back in pain. What do you mean by that?
We had a lot of losses in a relatively short time. And certain people, it's like they're afraid to say the person's name or any of the people's name because they're going to, it's like throwing somebody in a pool again who doesn't really want to swim anymore. You're tossing that person in and they did not necessarily want to go in. I don't think a lot of people realize that for the most part, you will take the pain of loss because the memories are more important to savor. Does that make sense?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Savoring the memories actually means that you're not pushing grief away. You're partnering with it. You're dancing with it. And that's the thing is that it's like dance. Dance is like a joyful thing. I don't know. Yes, I'm not going to certainly Paul is not coming back. My parents are not going to be returning anytime soon. These people have left this world as we know it, as I know it, and yet I want to keep their memory and my memory of them alive. And having a living memory is part of my rootedness to the legacy and the imprints that they have made on me in my life. So that's the conversation is okay. So you could never talk about your loved one, but how does that work? And doesn't that then cut off some part of your story? And if you stop talking about the people who've contributed to who you are, and it's no, we're not talking about that person or that person or that person, what are you left with? Because our histories are the people we have loved and lost, and even, frankly, some of the parts of the self that we have lost sometimes along the way. We need to remember the parts that we've lost and have conversations with our loved ones, have conversations even if we feel that we've lost a role. Okay, so if my parents have transitioned, does that mean I'm no longer a daughter? No, I'm always going to be a daughter. So how can I continue to be in the role of daughter? How on Mother's Day, on Father's Day, I will buy them a card. I will write in that card. I will celebrate my mother's birthday. And by doing something that she enjoyed and honoring her, I will wind Paul's Timex watch. I will talk about them. My husband never met my mother. He did meet my father. And my current husband, and happily married and in love, and I my husband knows about my mother and knows that
Yeah.
she was wonderful and fashionable and a runway model, and that this very well-dressed woman could be kooky, and at one point entered into a public swimming pool where her grandchildren were swimming and fully clothed walked in because they say, "Grandma, would you come swim with us?" And she did. And so I've just shared this story. I have goosebumps. You've gotten to know a little bit about my mom, Elizabeth, and it's part of who I am too.
Uh, I was just thinking it as you were saying that about us leaving out this person and that person. Your history becomes Swiss cheese, and you won't have any stories eventually.
That's
There,
right.
there won't be a past. And not to get too out there, but what is it they say about history? If we forget it, we're doomed to repeat it. That goes for the good stuff too.
That's right.
If you
That's
forget all the good things, oh, I wouldn't want to see this world without being able to share the stories of, yes, some of the quirkier things.
the quirky things. And she would have loved that I shared this story and giggled about it. And I also want to share that a lot of times there are assumptions that you had a good relationship with your parents or with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or even a friend who may have been a really good friend at one time, and then you parted ways. And not all relationships are good, and there's an expectation that you're going to mourn appropriately, whatever that means. And there are women and men who were in pretty horrific relationships and partnerships and feel relief and feel safety for the first time in their
Yeah.
lives. And so I also write about that in this book, because I often think we have an assumption about what grief needs to look like, and people sometimes feel they have to fake it. And I'm not talking about faking it. If you are relieved, I hope that you have someone you can actually tell the truth to, because that's okay too. It's okay to say, I'm not going to be hurt anymore. I'm not going to be watched over anymore, like in a dangerous way. I'm not going to be hit anymore. We've got a lot of people who sadly continue to live in homes where there's domestic violence. I just want to say that that goes on, and that relief is also can be part of grief.
That that's such a good point because it's not something we think about. But
No, at all.
I can definitely relate to that with a friend, and yeah,
Yeah,
total relief.
yeah, yeah. Well, and if you know someone who, you know, is in that kind of situation, you certainly don't want to come in and say, "Oh, you must be thrilled about this."
Oh,
But
yeah,
on the
yeah,
other hand, you can also say something to the effect of, "I just want you to know I'm here, and not everyone grieves the same way, and however you grieve, I'm right there with you." And it's just permission. That's all it is. It's not
yeah,
asking questions. I'm here to talk. And it just doesn't come in with an expectation of the shoulds of grief and
yeah,
grieving.
yeah. Yeah, we have to get rid of the shoulds because it can be very different
That's right.
for
That's
everybody. Yeah.
that's That's right.
And I will often say to someone, offer my condolences, and I will often say, I don't have adequate words to comfort you. Just know my heart sits with yours. Because sometimes I think it's worse to perhaps say the wrong thing than to offer something that's a little less specific because you're not quite sure
That's right.
how
That's
it
right.
will be received.
That's right. And I have a lot of diagrams and exercises in the book, but one of the diagrams are two circles. And one circle says above it before, and the other circle says after. And you're like the dot in the middle, okay, of each circle. And this is the friends you had and families you had before and their degree of closeness to you. And you could spread them out within the circumference or outside of the circle, frankly. And then after, and see how these relationships changed. It's possible that someone that was way on the outside all of a sudden comes in, that someone who was very close to you drops out, drops by the wayside, just maybe can't handle it, maybe doesn't know what to do, maybe is in their own grief reaction to a point where they feel lost themselves. And this is a wonderful exercise to do every 6 months and to see what's been the changing landscape of the people in your life before and the people after.
Oh, that's really good. It would actually work for divorce as well.
Oh, absolutely. It works for divorce. It works for certainly the death of a loved one,
Yeah.
and you fill in whatever that means. It's also good if someone is all of a sudden awake and aware to a traumatic imprint that they have experienced and that it's been swallowed, and there is grief for people who, and it's often not seen as grief, it's seen as anxiety or depression or you're dysregulated and from having experienced a sexually traumatic predatory event. And what is often missed is the grief reaction and what happens in this grief. And I coined a term called the sexual grief effect. And this sexual grief effect is the natural response to a predatory event or even a developmental experience, which being unwanted as a child or having a first bad sexual experience, that these affect us and create grief in our lives and really changes like the way we are in the world. And grief can change it, and the sexual grief can change it. And it's just a different lens. And what happens is you often feel like you're stuck and you're trapped. And it's not so much the cave where you're looking at like the stuff that's gotten in the way, your obstacles. It's actually deeper. You almost feel like you're imprisoned by the sexual grief, which is hard, really hard, and or grief, and that it's holding you and stopping you from living, from thriving. And there are people who, and if any of you are out there, I know that this is hard and that I have developed and it's not out there yet, what I've called the liberation protocol. And that first strategy and task of the liberation protocol is something called embodied curiosity. So to continue to go into the depths of your curiosity. What's going on? Where am I feeling this in my body? How is it getting expressed? Am I overeating, undereating? Am I sleeping too much? Am I not sleeping enough? Am I being hyperactive? Am I in denial? Am I protesting? Am I walking around just my fuse is just ready to go off? And that's where the embodied curiosity begins. And it's part of the liberation protocol.
Ah, and all of that is in your new book.
It's in the new book, which is not yet out there. I'm in the process of shopping it around for a publisher. And I can only hope that after the revision of this this first chapter and new proposal that someone's going to pick it up because it's, and the working title, if anybody's curious, is Dare to Live, Liberate the Self from Sexually Traumatic Events and Thrive.
That's the hell of a title. I think it's really necessary.
Thank you.
To be honest, I'm surprised there hasn't been a book before now. Because of the trauma. And when you think of sexual predators, I think the first word for me that comes to mind is loss.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
grief to me would only be natural.
that's right. And the grief is intense. And, you know, what results after a sexually traumatic predatory event, what occurs is that sense of the personal identity and your social identity and your sexual identity really get impacted greatly. The same thing happens with grief, but the difference is the grief after the loss of a loved one. But the grief after the loss of a loved one is very different. It's similar in that there's grief. It's very different because that is natural and it's part of the life cycle. Whereas the grief that occurs after a sexually traumatic predatory event or a developmental experience is uninvited.
Yeah, I was going to say, and to me, there's no upside. And upside's the wrong word. Grief allows for savoring the memories. In this case, there are no memories to savor. There isn't a silver lining, if you will.
So I'll tell you what the silver lining is. Okay. And it has to do with survivorship. And that is the silver lining. And we talk about survivors, we talk about going from victimhood to victor to survivor. I think sometimes when we use language over and over again, it's the same word. Sometimes we become immune to those words. So I've been playing around with the idea of survivalist. And what is a survivalist? But they're out in the middle of a forest trying to figure out how the heck am I going to get out of here? And they're naked and they're afraid and they're like, and they figure out the tools that they need to get out or to survive. And so I like to think of people who have lived to tell their story of what happened to them and remember it and begin to share it with themselves first. But one, they're on the beginning to knowing how they're going to live with it and live beyond it and not only be it, but be more than it, though it forever changes you. I'm a survivalist and it happened when I was 9. And yet, what I know is that if you can start to feel that there's a way to break out of the prison that got formed because of that event or experience, that you start to break out of that prison. And yeah, you grapple with the cave for sure because something happened to you that forever changed you. You find an internal voice that you've never had before. And there are wonderful like writing groups. There's something called AWA, and also the work of Mary Simmerling, Dr. Mary Simmerling, who's a poet and wrote a poem that went viral. She is an amazing poet and philosopher. And What You Were Wearing, and you can fill in the blanks. But what that does is it offers people to have a conversation. And I think that conversation is essential. And yes, we've been talking about grief from loss and the losses, and now another level of grief that one in 3 women and 1 in 9 or 10 men. It's very underreported with men and with women. So I say those numbers hesitantly, but you can certainly find more information on a website called RAINN, RAINN. And sadly, too many people lose their lives to suicide as a result of these events and experiences that I'm talking about. So I think that having this conversation here is important given the topic of your podcast here.
I cannot thank you enough. I think this is one of the most important topics we have because it is so underreported and because it is so prevalent. And I think the more we know, the more we talk about these things, the more that we can perhaps stop some of it.
Yes, that's right. That's
I
right.
think that's super important. I thank you so much, Edy. Everything today, you put a whole new spin on grief for me that I'm going to sit with for a bit. The piece on sexual grief, I think, is so deeply important. We'd love to have you back when the book is ready, and we
Thank
can
you.
talk about that as well.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
My pleasure to be back.
I see just below, you'll note that I have 2 of Edy's websites. You can go and check those out. All the other information, and I will ask Edy for the link for Rain and for that poem as well.
Yes, absolutely.
By the doctor, and we'll make sure that'll be below in all the show notes and information. This is a lot to process today, and I am ever so grateful. I'm Elaine Lindsay. My guest, Edy Nathan, has joined us today, and she said she'll come back, which is awesome. I'd like you, our audience, to make the most of your today every day, and we're going to see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for being here for another inspiring episode of Suicide Zen Forgiveness. We appreciate you tuning in. Please subscribe and download on your favorite service and check out SZF's YouTube channel or Facebook community. If you have the chance to leave a 5-star rating or review, it'd be greatly appreciated. Please refer this to a friend you know who may benefit from the hope and inspiration from our guests. Suicide Zen Forgiveness was brought to you by the following sponsors. Truel Social Media, the digital integration specialists. Let them get you rocking page 1 in the search results. Canada's keynote humorist Judy Kroon, motivational speaker, comedian, author, and stand-up coach at Second City, Judy has been involved for over a decade in the City Street Outreach Program in Toronto.
The ultimate podcasting hack. This is great for you. You're just starting your podcast, or if you've been running it for a while. It's filled with tools, templates, and training for starting, growing, and monetizing your podcast. Get access to time-saving systems, strategies for accelerating the process at each step. Find new connections and collaborations in the uplifting podcasting community. I look forward to seeing you there.
Do you have a story to share? Do you know someone you think would be a great guest? Please go to szf42.com. And for our American listeners, that's szf42.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again.